Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. It's that time again, Friday, July the 7th, 2023. That was the week in tech, and what a week it was. A week dominated by the thread of threads. Keith leads. Do you like my threads? With I have to admit, Keith, a very Jewish-looking Mark Zuckerberg. You made that out of AI. I'm sure there's going to be times where GPT-4 is going to get sued for anti-Semitism. You're not a big fan, though. You're not excited. I was surprised. I thought you would have been thrilled with some more innovation from Mr. Zuckerberg.
I'm not unexcited about it. I just don't think it's going to damage Twitter. I think the whole thesis that's out there is that it's pretty political, actually. It's people who don't really like Mark Zuckerberg cheering him on simply because they hate Elon Musk even more.
Yeah, it's Stalin versus Hitler.
Exactly. or Stalin versus Kropotkin might be closer, but yeah, it honestly, the whole narrative around it is made up. It's clearly going to be an impressive app in terms of user base. Why? Because Facebook has 2.7 billion.
Yeah, I mean, the latest count is what, 70 million people signed up?
Yeah, so I made the point it's going to be big. It's going to be impressive. It's going to be an advertising revenue stream for Facebook.
Well, that's their business. It's the same as Twitter, right?
It's their business, but it isn't going to be Twitter. And I don't think they even want it to be Twitter. They're trying to build something that copies the user interface of Twitter without actually being Twitter.
How hard is it to copy the interface? It seems to be everywhere you go on the internet these days, there are Twitter lookalikes.
Yeah, you can copy the interface super easily. That's what Mastodon, which we talked about before, Blue Sky, they're all copying the interface. Not all the behaviors, like you can't do things on threads that you can do on Twitter yet, like hashtags, for example. So it's different. It's a subset. I call it a minimum viable Twitter in my editorial.
Yeah, in your editorial, you say, you describe I don't know whether this is the Mark Zuckerberg or your AI version of Zuckerberg. He has the demeanor of a naughty schoolboy. He brazenly misbehaves and yet somehow insists he's playing fair. You write, Threads, let's be honest, a very poor Twitter clone. It looks a bit like Twitter, smells like Twitter, and even feels a bit like Twitter, and that's intended. It's a minimum viable Twitter, or an MVT. Mark is a copycat, and I think you meant in Fibber, but you wrote F-I-B-E-R. That may be a Freudian error, Keith.
It's a Freudian error. I should have put the second B in there.
But is this a big? I mean, is it a big deal? It seems. I mean, the press love this stuff. They love the Musk-Zuckerberg confrontation. They love Facebook taking on Twitter. It must have some impact, especially from the advertising point of view.
Look, I think what's going to happen here is the people who hate Twitter hate it because Musk allows right-wing points of view to exist on it. So it's mainly the left against Musk, and they try to depict Musk as white supremacist, homophobic, lots of things that he really isn't. And what they're doing is embracing Threads as the antidote when, the history of Facebook.
You talk about these dark forces. Who are these people? I think that's because you don't like the left yourself.
Well, I am of the left, but I don't like this monochrome left that dominates.
But the conservatives think that Twitter is for the real left, so everyone's against it.
Twitter's everything. That's the thing. So you can hate it or love it depending on your demeanor. It's a glass half full, glass half empty attitude towards Twitter. So you're going to find right-wing people, glass half empty, who hate it, and left-wing people, glass half empty, who hate it. But the truth is, it's the closest thing we've got to where everything exists. And the Facebook equivalent isn't trying to even be that. It's trying to be safe. I think safe is a big word. It's trying to be non-controversial. You might say it's trying to be boring. Why? Because that's what advertisers like. They don't like to, anything to rock the boat.
I can think of some very successful boring media companies. Disney comes to mind. So that's not a dumb ambition from a business point of view.
No, I totally. That's why I said I'm not saying it's going to be a failure. It just isn't going to be a Twitter.
But they're not claiming to be a Twitter. So
Well,
I mean, nobody's. I mean, the only person who's suggesting they want to be a Twitter is Musk.
No. All of the adopters are saying this is where I'm going from Twitter. They're seeing it as a replacement, and it won't replace the experience they get on Twitter. They may argue they don't get a good experience on Twitter, but that's probably because they're biased. And I personally think because they're biased, they don't like hearing other points of view.
Yeah, well, my experience of Twitter is there's very little diversity. I mean, it's an echo chamber depending on which community you're in. So what is Zuckerberg? And I don't suppose there'll be anything different on any other network. What's Zuckerberg up to? You have a link in this week's newsletter. Twitter's final boss, Zuckerberg wages war. Does Zuckerberg really care about Twitter? Doesn't he have bigger fish to fry?
He cares about being relevant, and he's very good at that. Over the years, he's made major decisions that have led to Facebook staying relevant, from buying Instagram to buying WhatsApp, and now moving away from the metaverse, which he was focused
it's
on.
convenient. I mean, it seems a smart move just in the sense that no one's talking about the metaverse anymore.
Great, yeah, exactly right. And this, hitting Twitter whilst it down, and I think it would be foolish of us not to think that he was thinking about Twitter as he was building this. He thinks he can build a bigger version. Twitter peaks out around 300 million people. Zuckerberg has 10 times that, and he thinks this probably could become 1 billion people. And in order for that to be true, it should be mainstream. Which is the word I'm using is safe, but it should be mainstream and as uncontroversial as possible. It clearly isn't a social network in the same way that Facebook is, because it's about opinions and points of view and posts.
Why can't you put opinions on Threads?
No, you can. I'm saying it is about that. Unlike Facebook, which is about your friends, a lot at least. So
you can, but Facebook's full of opinions too. I mean, you express
it is, but its core use case is the people you know.
I mean, my limited experience, I opened a Thread account and an Instagram account simultaneously, and I have the honor of having 0 followers on Threads, and I don't follow anyone. And the same as on Instagram. So I hope that will stay the same. Then I won't have to bother with it. But my sense is it will reflect Instagram, because.
Well, let me ask you this: does the world need another scrolling feed of the same people you already see saying slightly less interesting things? I mean, to me, it's a non-product designed as a weapon. I think that thing you showed about the war is exactly right. It's a non-product designed as a weapon that the world doesn't need. And the only reason people like it is because it isn't Twitter.
So how is it different from Instagram?
It's going to be different because it isn't image-led. It's going to be text-led.
But you can post anything you want. It'll be good for video. We'll put our stuff up, right?
Yeah, you can, but it's like the DNA or the center of gravity of Twitter and the center of gravity of Threads are somewhat similar, whereas the center of gravity of Instagram is different. It's really pictures of.
Right. Well, speaking of centers of gravity, you have a TechCrunch post quoting. I'm surprised they post this. You can't post ass. Threads is doomed. So there's no sex on Threads. Is there sex on Instagram?
I believe the answer is yes.
But it says Instagram's puritanical guidelines. Doesn't Facebook have puritanical guidelines as well?
Yeah, it does. It does. Twitter has the least puritanical, but I think that's because its software isn't as good at finding stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to make any jokes on software and hardware, Keith, given...
But the point that this author is making is the right point, which is it's going to be a highly policed and controlled environment.
Like China.
Like China.
Like Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Like Singapore.
Not anymore, really, in Singapore. Like Singapore used to be.
I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, you say you linked also to the Adam Mosseri announced today that he believes that Threads isn't for news and politics, but whatever it's for or isn't, I mean, people will still post about news and politics, especially during the election cycle when we all get obsessed again with Trump.
Well, the fact that he made that statement, and he did it on Threads, I think, tells you how the mindset is at Facebook, that they are actually the policemen of thought. You know, they think that they know best. They're kind of an elite overlording it over everyone.
Who do you dislike more, the Facebook people or your hordes of left wingers? Puritanical left wingers.
They're the same people. They're actually the same people.
Wow, there's no conspiracy here, is there?
By the way, and I want to say, I'm left wing. I would still identify as a Marxist, but I'm not.
This picture of Zuckerberg looks a little. It doesn't look very intolerant here. The AI you created of him.
Yeah, it's a great AI.
You should have. You know what it should have. You should have had the title. Do you like my ass?
I hadn't seen that article by then. Otherwise, I still would not have used that title, actually, thinking about it. But I did ask.
You would have got into trouble.
I used Mid-Journey.
Police. Are they going to put people in jail or just throw them out if they're naughty? What happens if you misbehave on Threads?
You'll get blocked or banned, or they've got all this takedown stuff on Facebook already. They'll just use the same stuff. But look, it doesn't really matter. It's another instantiation of Facebook. The only thing that's changed is the user interface. I'm seeing all the same people on it that I see. I've got 2,000 followers, I think, on Instagram. I'm seeing the same 2,000. By the way, it's the same people I saw on Mastodon. So this is like a roving trial.
There are only two people on all these things. It's you and Jeff Jarvis. How do you have time to go on these things?
It's research, Andrew, for you and our show.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, in all seriousness, though, isn't all this Twitter's death by 1,000 cuts? I mean, how many more can it take? I don't know its business well enough. I mean, does anyone know? I guess they're a private company now, so Musk doesn't have to reveal their numbers, but they can't be good.
I think there's a very strong case that he's doing a fantastic job. He's reduced the workforce by 75% or more. He has opened it up to proper conversation. There is still advertising. In fact, the biggest complaint on Twitter is that there's too much advertising, which I think I agree with.
Why is it more open under Musk than it ever was?
Because the Twitter management before Musk was basically banning anyone they considered to be right-wing, in quotes, or in their language, in violation of their terms and conditions. And, that's just not a democratic society when you do that. And Musk isn't right-wing, but he's not okay about banning people who are right-wing. So he opened it up. He said, no, you can all post. It's fine. And
how many people did they ban? I mean, Trump and a few others. It didn't. Does it really make a difference?
No. If you go back to before Musk, it was thousands every day.
Thousands? It sounds like the Soviet gulags.
It was the.
Are they more Nazis or communists? Keith?
Well, you're having fun with it, Andrew, but you must admit that taking on the role of the editorial board, lording it over Twitter users, is not a nice image. I mean, it just was unnecessary.
Well, as you know, I hate Twitter, and I do everything I can to avoid it. I think it's just annoying. It makes me want to have a shower. And if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Who cares, right? You can go to. I mean, there's just more and more options now. There's Threads.
There is, but startups have something hardcore about their vision, and Twitter's hardcore vision always was to be this public square. So that was never Facebook's intent. It isn't Instagram's intent. It is definitely not Threads' intent. So the only entity that has the mission or vision to be the public square is Twitter. So it's unique in that regard. And I think it's doing a better job under Musk than it did before him.
But the whole idea of being a public square is it's not public. It's a private company, and it's
that's inevitable. You know why that's inevitable? We talk about this a lot, but it's inevitable because of globalism. There is no nation capable of providing a global public square. So inevitably, software plays that role. And someone who has the audacity to stand up and say, well, that's us, deserves a pat on the back.
Well, I'm not convinced. What else? I have a feeling that this is just a summer news story. It will go away. There'll be some people on Threads, and I just think it's all a bit old-fashioned. They're fighting battles, the same old battles that have been happening for years.
Yeah. Well, we probably both agree on one thing. Two things really. One is Threads will be successful based on the definition of success that Facebook will have for it, and two, Twitter won't go away.
Yeah, well, we'll see. What else happened this week in addition to Threads? You have some interesting essays of the week. You write about Benedict Anderson. I know you're no, sorry, not Benedict Evans. You say he had a wonderful essay this week entitled AI and the Automation of Work. I mean, it's a big subject. What's Evans saying?
So he surveys the history of automation and the impact on work, primarily to make a single point, which is that automation has never led to less jobs, although it's been painful in the short term whilst adjustments take place.
But that's not very original. We've heard that.
Not very original. And at the end, he says that this will be the same. Now, the reason I published it is I disagree with the context he gives to it. I personally believe that he's wrong to suggest that automation is a constant with no end. I think you get to the point where there really are no or very few jobs required. Work with a capital W. He seems to think that will not happen.
But you celebrate. You think that's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing, and he talks about it being painful. And I put it in because Vinod Khosla is in Video of the Week, and he talks about the same thing in the video, but takes a totally different point of view. Vinod makes the point that the end of work is the best thing that could happen to the human race, as long as
private beach.
Well, he makes the point that as long as society takes the wealth it creates and makes sure everybody's life is raised up because of it. So he takes a kind of a fairly revolutionary social stance and a technocratic AI stance and puts them together, which is also what Sam Altman does. And I think that combination of the need for social change when there is an abundance of wealth is super interesting and very pertinent to the way the world's going to evolve.
Yeah, except I don't see any political evidence. Where are the parties? Where are the thinkers? Where, I mean, you have a few wealthy VCs saying it, but that's it.
That's why it's interesting. I think we're at the beginning of the most important conversation of the next century.
Is that why you have another link from Mark Siegel's believing that generative AI is such a nuclear, he uses the nuclear force. I mean, that's provocative.
Yeah, that's a more trivial piece. I put it in the AI section, not the essays of the week. It's a more trivial piece, but it's making the point that as we see with the Zuckerberg one I made, the ability to produce good art is really skyrocketing, very, very fast, skyrocketing.
Well, here's an example for people watching. This is excellent art, Keith, that your AI made of Mark Zuckerberg.
I mean, it's super good. Imagine if I tried to do that myself.
Do you think there's a market for a young, rather Jewish-looking Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, two things. He is young and he is Jewish, so I think. And I did
ask young and particularly Jewish.
I did ask Midjourney to give me a portrait of Mark Zuckerberg as a little boy looking lost, and it gave me this kind of boy's own.
He looks like he's lost in Warsaw or something in about 1934.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and in the midst of all this, Keith, in the midst of threads and all this stuff about ChatGPT and AI changing the world, you managed to slip in your heartthrob, a certain Paul Graham.
Yeah.
How to do great work. That sounds like the essay he's been writing for the last 20 years. What's interesting about this?
Well, firstly, it's very thoughtful and very long. It's probably a half-hour read.
Is he capable of writing anything less than 20,000 words? Can't he sum it up in a tweet or a thread?
No, because it's got lots of nuance in it. It's really how to be your best self. And he talks about the emotional and the practical side of that. And honestly, it's a super, super good essay.
What does he say? I mean, what are some of the takeaways then? How do we become a better self?
You know, he says a lot of obvious things, but at greater length with examples. Things like follow your passion, not your wallet.
That's very original.
Not your wallet. Yeah, but you know, most people don't know what that means. When I talk to my kids about that, they'll say, "Well, I don't have a passion," and most human beings have never had the sense of freedom that allows them to even consider the question of what their passion is. You need to be free to have a passion, and you know that's why it's such a good essay. It really pokes at the big ideas that you need to do good work, and it's almost futuristic, but it draws on lots of past experiences. And I can't really summarize it because it's got too much in it.
It's interesting that he's writing at a time where there's a huge pushback against the idea of work as bringing meaning to your life. There's a new book out. I can't remember the name. He's been on my Keen On show. A new book out saying that you shouldn't believe that work is your passion and you should just basically do whatever you can and have a real life outside work. But Graham, I assume, is not saying that.
No, he's not. It's about life through work. Being, you know, if you ask the question at the end of your life, who am I? A big part of the answer is the work you did and what it resulted in.
Yeah.
So what is a human being other than the sum total of their endeavors? And therefore, why wouldn't you want to do things you enjoy? And how would you get the means to do that? So that then focuses on things like freedom of time, of thinking, of determination. I mean,
so does this come back to, I mean, this is basically what you're saying and others are saying about AI, is it will, and it's back to the German ideology, Marx's arguments in the 19th century, is that technology will free us up to realize ourselves, our species being.
Yeah, I actually think Marx, not that we should proselytize any writer from hundreds of years ago, but it'll become interesting how relevant those views are. The best quote I like from Marx is, "I'm not a Marxist." He said that many times.
Do you think that Marx would be allowed on Threads?
He would, because he'd be reasonable.
Get thrown off. He'd need to shave his beard off, right? You can't be really long beards on Threads, could you?
Yeah, Stalin wouldn't be allowed on there, though.
Stalin definitely wouldn't. I mean, with his moustache. Stalin would be better off on Twitter with you and Elon. No,
definitely not. He'd be better off on Truth, whatever it's called.
Oh, that's the what's the right? What has Trump said about?
Nothing.
It's very interesting.
Nothing that I'm aware of, anyway.
So you like the Graham piece? you like the Evans piece? What about this? How analytics win? I didn't link to it, and the modern data stack. It looked a bit forbiddingly technical for me. What are these guys saying?
The modern data stack is really of interest to anyone who's an innovator on software, because it's really how intelligence, data, and applications work in the modern era. So all of the assumptions you used to have have now changed. And this guy is very, very good. And he wrote a, I think
it sounds Albanian. Erges Jeblati.
Yeah, no, that's the modern data stack I'm talking about. How analytics wins is different. That is the need to discover cause and effect in order to be able to predict, and how data helps you discover cause and effect, which is very close to my heart. What causes big companies to grow and get valuable?
And then, of course, speaking of big companies getting valuable, OpenAI has made GPT-4 generally available. Is that a big deal, Keith? It seems as if they always made it. What's the change this week?
You had to pay the $20 to be able to access it. Now the free people can do it too. They also announced today that isn't in the newsletter because it just happened, that they've now built this thing called code something like Code Interpreter, which allows it to become your coding buddy with lots of different languages that it supports. And you can run the code in a live environment inside your chat to see if it works.
When are we going to get, and I'm sure it probably already exists, the first ChatGPT, exclusively ChatGPT social network?
I doubt there'll be one, because I don't think that's the sweet spot for ChatGPT. But I do think that there will be intelligent bots on social networks, and already are, and they're going to get more and more capabilities. I played with Pi this week, the one we mentioned last week.
Yeah.
Which has now added voice, so you can talk to it and it can talk back to you on the iPhone app. However, it's really naughty. It basically,
like Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, exactly. I asked it, could it help me write an investment memorandum for SignalRank? It said, give me some links. So I gave it some links. Then it said, give me some documents. I gave it some documents. And it said, give me the economic model. I gave it the economic model. Then it kept asking questions, lots of questions. Half an hour later, I said, okay, can you write me the memorandum now? And it said, oh, did I give you the impression I could write a document? No, I can't. I'm just learning from you.
So that's good.
I wasted half an hour teaching it.
Well, when are we going to teach an AI to be on the show? Then I won't have to do this, or you won't have to do it, if one of us is out of town.
I think we're some ways away from that, because imagine what would have to happen. Firstly, it would have to learn about you and me, which is the easy bit. Secondly, we'd have to give it a feed of all the week's news, which is also...
We already have that. That's given.
Yeah, but it can't read it yet. So we have to make it... It has to be able to read it. And then it has to adopt each of our personas and argue against itself or agree with itself. That's the hard bit.
Well, can't we invent a persona, make it into Paul Graham?
We can't. You and me, no. There probably is someone out there. Listeners, if you are an AI engineer and you could create an AI version of this show, we're
someone's going to be working on, not for us, but that's the real killer. I mean, I would love one of those on my podcast, and I don't have to have guests. I just have someone to chat with. One other pieces of interesting news, sort of attached with AI, is that San Francisco, well, I'm not there at the moment, I'm in New York, but where I live, is the AI capital of the world. So San Francisco is back, surprise, surprise, after everyone writing it off. And we'll talk about Miami as the AI capital of the world.
Well, the funny thing is Miami is the crypto capital of the world, which sadly is not a thing anymore. At least.
When's your friend Mike Arrington coming back to San Francisco? I'd have to hold his nose, all those other horribly right-wing VCs.
Mike won't come back. And Mike isn't particularly right-wing, by the way. I think he's a libertarian. but he's not coming back anytime soon.
And what about the rest of the crowd? All
But I
those,
think other people will drift back. I do think that.
they all come out with excuses. Oh, we missed the food.
And guess why AI is choosing San Francisco? The reason is money is here, and there really isn't anywhere near as much money in Miami. So money talks.
So San Francisco's back. Surprise, surprise. You've got some other interesting news. Lots of the VC collapse continues. Headlines. U.S. venture capital drops sharply. Unicorns face mass extinction. Do you remember in the old days, Keith? Every week we had a piece by Genet from Crunchbase saying there's another 10,000 unicorns. We haven't heard of a unicorn recently.
Exactly. So yeah, the funny one there is the first one. By the way, you should look at the first one.
Oh, the nutrition, sleep, and mental. I was going to make a link, and then I forgot. Mental health to tech founders at risk of burnout. So what's that piece?
So this is a British fund called Balderton Capital. Balderton, for those who don't know, used to be called Benchmark. It was the European version of Benchmark. And two friends of mine who are investors in Single Rank were the founders, or two of the three founders, George Colo and Eric Archambault. And what Balderton has decided is that the correction in the markets is so devastating that founders are getting burned out due to mental health and lack of fitness. And so they've decided that it's a core mission for Balderton to provide mental health and physical health services to founders, which just made me want to throw up, actually. I just thought, oh my God, they're turning into parents and they're infantilizing.
You are particularly libertarian this week. You're against them. You're against Zuckerberg. You don't want to be controlled, Keith. Well, you don't want to be told what to do, whether
I
it's
don't want my VC
or Mark Zuckerberg.
I don't want my VC to turn into a parent with opinions and turn me into an infant with no agency, which is basically what they're doing. It's shocking that they would even think it's a good idea.
The subject of the collapse of the venture capital industry.
Yeah.
Is something particularly bad happen this week, or is it just the same old bad news?
Well, so if you imagine the downward curve of all the different funding rounds in venture, the news this week actually is that the curves turned back up a little bit during the last quarter, both in terms of valuation and amount raised, not in terms of number of companies being funded, that's still going down, and not in terms of the amount of venture being raised by venture funds, that's still going down. But the valuations and the amount invested per round has ticked back up again. You know, we always talked about the flowers in the desert, which is the AI boom, but there's also biotech. So I think we may be at the beginning of the next growth phase.
Yeah, it's the smart money always wins out. These people know exactly what they're doing, and there are always startups, and there's always a startup of the week for our show. This week, it's the SoftBank backing of the Japanese robotics startup Teare Existence. So they put in $170 million. What's interesting about Teare Existence, Keith?
So the only reason I put this in is that after decades of people talking about robotics, because of AI, we may well now be at the beginning of when we start to see useful robotics that do something other than stamp cars out in factories. I think the Japanese ability to be both artistic and scientific at the same time, not unlike the French, is going to drive this because they have science-based education, but with creativity as well. And it's a bad moment for SoftBank, and they're making a very big bet here. And my guess is we're going to start hearing more and more about robotics. So that's why I put it in. This particular company, there's nothing special about it. It's just one of many. But I think it's newsworthy that SoftBank is doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like the beginning of a lot of very interesting things. And finally, was this tweet of the week or thread of the week? Or
it was tweet of the week, but it's a thread. So I had to change it to thread of the week.
Okay, well, for people listening who want to see this, it's a really good photo. A cool young guy in dark glasses, a rather idiotic guy in a white suit, a very striking woman in a blue suit, and a rather overweight man in a Hawaiian shirt. And one's from Blue Sky, one's from Twitter, one's from Threads, and one's from Mastodon. Guess which is which, Keith? How would you connect? So to me, if I wanted to be in one of these, I'd want to be Blue Sky. That's the coolest, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the Jack Dorsey one. So Blue Sky is cool and wears shades. Twitter tries to be cool but doesn't pull it off. Threads is aspirational.
Cool.
It's
yeah.
Well, I think it is cool, but it's also aspirational.
You just can't look like that woman in the blue suit.
And Mastodon is 1960s hippies trying to decentralize social networks.
I think one thing we can say for sure, Keith, is that Mastodon is toast. That one is not going to win out, right?
Yep, I agree with that.
And all these other ones, I mean, is Blue Sky for real? I mean, you don't really hear much about that. I got an invitation. I couldn't be bothered to fill it out.
I would say a good title for this week's newsletter would be "And Then There Were Two," which is Twitter and Threads. And they're
you come around. You wrote it off before. You said that they were.
No, I said it'll thrive. It just won't be Twitter, and Twitter will thrive too.
Well, that's sad. You know what? You sounding more and more like someone posting on Threads. Profoundly inoffensive. Say something outrageous to end, Keith.
Something outrageous
about Threads. I mean, you told me they're going to coexist. Threads will be Threads, and Twitter will be Twitter. I don't think people needed to spend 30 minutes on this show to learn that.
Threads is going to be a place for infantilized people to act within constraints policed by Facebook and Instagram.
Sounds like this show.
It'll be safe and boring.
It's like going to Disneyland. And then what's Twitter?
Twitter is going to be, the public square where all points of view exist and often clash, and out of which comes new ideas.
Wow. Well, you better go back to Twitter. That was the week for July the 7th, 2023. Next week, we won't, I hope, talk about Threads, but we will, I'm sure, talk about AI. And I'm completely sure that Keith will manage to get Paul Graham onto the show too. What is it about Paul Graham, Keith? Why do you love him so much?
He makes you think. He's thoughtful, and it's a huge effort for him to write that essay. And the only winner really is the readers. So I like him.